This is Zach with MyCodeTeacher.com, and this is going to be a two-part series, mini-series, I guess you could say, on buttons and functions, or methods, as we would call them in the iOS SDK. So the goal here is we're going to make a button which is going to change some text, and we're also going to make a function that is going to pass a parameter or an argument, as you would say, and it's going to determine what type of text we're going to change. Not what type of text we're going to change, but it's going to give the value to change in the text. So it's going to all be predefined, but it's going to give you a little bit of an understanding with buttons and functions. So we're going to go ahead and get started by adding or making a simple button that changes some text, and then in the next tutorial we're going to build off of that, and we're going to add in some methods there to change things around a little bit. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started, and by the end of this tutorial and the next one you'll have a full understanding of buttons and a little bit of insight towards methods. So let's go ahead and get started. Just to clarify, as we start building this project, a function and a method are essentially the same thing, and that they both execute sets of code. A method is just a different name for a function because it belongs in a class or an object. So if I say function and if I say method, it's essentially the same thing. There are some minor differences. You can look on Google to clarify that a little bit, but just for now, we're going to be referencing them as the same thing. So we're going to build a single view application, and we're going to make sure we set it to the iPhone family, and we're going to call this product name buttons and methods. And again, for the company identifier, you can go ahead and put whatever your company name is. I put iDataware. Obviously your company is an iDataware, so just put whatever company makes sense, and you can call it whatever you want. Our last tutorial was the UI slider, which is why that's still here. We're going to go ahead and change that to buttons and methods. And so it's important to have a proper company identifier here, and in fact it looks like it already adds the name of the application to the bundle identifier right here. So the bundle identifier is just a unique ID that Apple identifies your application with. So as you do updates, you have to make sure that your bundle identifier is the same, or it's going to be recognized as a new application. So let's go ahead and click next, and that'll begin our project, and we're going to save this to the desktop. And so the first thing we want to do is simply we just want to go to the storyboard and add a button. So over here on the right side I've got my objects available. If you don't have those available, you can go to View, Utilities, Show File Inspector, and it's going to pop up over here on the right side. And the third tab out of these four right here is the Objects cube, and that's going to hold all the objects that you can start working with in the iPhone. And so we really just need a UI button, and it's a round rectangle button from the class UI button. So we're going to go ahead and actually it looks like the objects or the file inspector is in the actual code part. So let's go to storyboard and let's add that file inspector right over here, and it's going to pop up right over here. And let's bring this window up a little bit so we have more space, and let's go ahead and add a button. Now the UI button can take on many different properties. It can have a custom image. It can have different color text, and there's a lot of different actions that you can do with the button, such as when your finger pushes down on the button, change the picture to this. When the finger taps the button and then lets go, then change the picture back. If you let go, then execute a method. If you touch it, then execute a method. If you touch outside of it, execute a method. So there's a lot of different actions that we can work with on here on a button, but in this case we're just going to make it a nice and easy, plain simple button. We're just going to call it push. Actually in this case let's call it tap, because that's what you're really doing when you're holding the iPhone in your hand. So we're going to go ahead and put that right there, and we're going to add a label right down here. And when we hit tap, we're going to change this label to say tapped. And so it'll be nice and simple, and then the next tutorial will build off of that, which is going to define all the properties within this class. Let's go ahead and add these two objects right here. It's going to hold the set amount of properties and define where it starts and where it ends. And so we need to use an IB outlet. And if you don't know what an IB outlet is basically declaring that this is going to be part of our storyboard, that this label or this object that we're about to declare here is going to be recognized from the storyboard. And you'll see here in a second where we go with this, but we're going to need two IB outlets. And so we're going to go ahead and make a UI button. We're going to call it button. Alright, and then the next one's going to be a UI label. We'll go ahead and call that label. I know pretty basic names. Doesn't matter what you call your variables as long as they work. So we'll go ahead and save that. And let's jump back over here into the code. So right over here to the right is going to be our connections inspector. And with that, we can help tell the iPhone exactly the variables that we named in our code, what it belongs to. And so we have to say the type. It has to understand what type of object it is. But with that, we can do many things with those objects. And so we'll get into that in later tutorials. But let's go ahead and go to the view controller for now. And so the first thing we need to do is we need to connect our button. So we simply drag, press and hold, and move our mouse. And we're going to look over the button right here. And then we're going to connect our label. So we go to the label. And you see that if I put this over the button, it's not going to highlight. That's not because it's already been selected, but that's because in the code we declared the button variable to be of type UI button. And the label is of type UI label. So that's why when I hover over the label, it's going to go ahead and highlight. So if you're trying to connect something and it's not working, make sure it's the right type. And if you don't know what the type is, you can select on a button, for example. And we can move, and we can see exactly, you select the button, you can see class as UI button, so you want to make sure that you get the right class as it's labeled. UI label and UI button. So we'll save it, and if we go back to code, you'll see that these two empty circles are now filled in with a gray circle. And so with that, we know that the IB outlets are successfully connected. If they're empty, then something went wrong. So now we need to make a method, and this is not the place that I'm going to be describing what a method is and how to use it, other than the basic principles. In the next tutorial we'll get into a little bit more advanced methods by passing arguments and setting parameters. And so the way you call a method is you start out with a dash, and then you say what return type the method is going to have. If it's not going to have a return type, you put void. In this case, we're going to say this is an IB action. It's going to return an action, and more so, it's really going to receive an action. So we're going to say this is an IB action, and we're going to go ahead and call it button pushed. Now this is a very basic method, and we're basically saying this is tied in to our storyboard, which we'll define here in a second. So it's really hard for me to explain methods when it's more tied in with the storyboard rather than building one from scratch. So that's why in the next tutorial we're really going to get into what it is, how to do it, how to make it, and that kind of a thing. So for now, we're just going to go along with this. So go ahead and click on your viewcontroller.m. We have to put the same method in the code. When we put it in the .h is just, look at it like a definition or a table of contents. It's really just telling you these are going to exist. It's promising the code that these certain aspects and components of the code are actually going to exist, but they'll be defined later. And so the .m is really the actual page. So we see the table of contents, we click on the certain page that we want to go to, and that's going to be the full page, or in this case the code. So we're going to say this is an IB action, and we're going to call it button pushed. And what we need to do now is we need to simply say label.text equals pushed or tapped, whatever you want to put. So nice and simply now, that's added there. All we need to do now is we'll click on our connections inspector or attributes, and we'll click on the view controller. Let's drag this down a little bit to add more room. And you can see here under received actions, the code that we typed in has now appeared. It's called button pushed. So we're going to go ahead and drag this right over the button, And we're going to say touch up inside, which means basically when we push anywhere inside the button, it's going to call that method. So we should be good to go ahead and compile now. So if we click run, it's going to load up right here. I select it, and you can see that it's pushed. Now the text looks a little small. That's because the label tries to automatically adjust to the size that we put in the storyboard. So let's go ahead and widen that up a little bit so we can make it a little bit bigger here. So we'll click on our view. We'll make the label a little bit bigger. Make it go there in the center. If we come over here, we can align the text to the center, and you can even make it bigger if that's what you want. So we're going to make this really wide. We're going to drag it right here to the center. We'll save it, and now we'll rerun it. And we're going to tap it, and you see right there, pushed or tapped. And so that's going to conclude this tutorial with buttons, but in the next tutorial we're going to work on some methods to show you how to pass in data, how to create a method from scratch that's not an IB action, and that should hopefully build more of a foundation for an introduction to methods for you. So this is Zach from MyCodeTeacher.com. We'll see you in the next tutorial.